Hi, and welcome to Season 8, Episode 4 of My Words, Our Journey, the podcast. I'm Monty, your host. This season, When Karma Kills. If you remember, Gray has started her killing spree. Kenny has asked Trish to move in, and he was also arrested outside of a double homicide and asked not to leave town. Let's conclude this journey with Chapter 17, Radical Nut. Trade, Tennessee is a dot on a map. A place you travel through to get to somewhere else. At least that's how Gray would explain it. She liked the beautiful fields and mountains, the steep and winding roads that led to homes that must have amazing views. But unless you were looking for a local church, you were driving a distance to find anything else. Smitty, he had inherited his childhood home in this quiet little community. Fun fact Gray had learned about Trade. It was the oldest town in the state. After driving through Boone, North Carolina, she had decided she'd stop there on her way back through. Spend the night, maybe walk the main street, get some food recommendations from the locals. There was no sense driving back when such a cute spot was waiting to be explored. She had never been to this area of the country, may never have another opportunity, so she was going to take advantage of it. The old house was off the beaten path, in an already remote area of the state. Those facts would have worked in her favor, if not for the fact that her target was a radical nut. Raised wire fence, enough weapons to arm the entire county, if he believed his social media posts. Add on top of that, the fact that he was now on edge because of recent events. Timing is sometimes everything. She was counting on it in this case. This evening, the local armory was holding a rally, geared towards raising awareness, something about uprising that was inevitable if the upcoming election went a certain way. Gray stopped reading the announcements. The first few lines said enough. She was not political, but they could be right. The world was a screwed up place. You could all turn on each other any day as far as she was concerned. The rally boasted refreshments at 5:30, introductions beginning promptly at 6. Gray would be watching. There was no real plan. She would know when the time was right. Could be the parking lot. Could be a little push off the road on the short trip home. She wasn't sure. What she did know was that Smitty made it back to his lair. She would have missed her chance, and God only knew when he would leave again. Darkness was an hour away when the first guest began to arrive. Gray knew what her target drove. He would not be hard to miss. His van was one of his pride and joys. Everyone that followed him on his social media sites knew it. The black van pulled in 10 minutes before the introductions. From a distance, it didn't resemble the famous vehicle. Smitty parked 2 rows up, 3 autos to the left. He was a big man, at least 6'4", she'd guessed, pushing 270. She would have to stay out of his reach, she thought, as he lumbered through the wooden doors. When the last car pulled in, a little after 6, Gray guessed there was nearly 100 people in the event. This was a big number for such a small community. While she waited, she wished she had learned a few more skills from the other inmates during her stretch. Cutting brake lines, small explosive devices 101, that sort of thing. Either could have come in handy right now. Chapter 18, Holding Back. Kenny sat in the holding area for almost an hour and a half while the detectives made him wait. It was an old-timer technique believed to wear him down, stress out the suspect. It only annoyed Kenny. His attorney had gotten stuck in traffic, but he kept him posted on his ETA. 10 minutes before his arrival, 2 detectives walked in the room, both holding cups of coffee and chatting amongst themselves. They asked Kenny to repeat his story from the night before. They were searching for mistakes, inconsistencies, lies. When Kenny was done, the 2 men sat back and asked a simple question. Why would we get a random call from a good Samaritan telling us about the killings and implying you had something to do with it? Kenny knew this was coming. What he didn't know was how to answer the question. A small voice told him to hold back. It wasn't time to discuss the possibility of Gray. So, gentlemen, I know you're doing your job. I did the same job for years. With that being said, I'm going to assume you've traced the call. I'll also assume you won't tell me anything about the call, so let me just speculate. My attorney should be here any minute. He'd kill me if I was doing this. The call was either made from a disposable phone or from a condo on the premises. Either way, she's in the wind. Why? Also, no prints, hair, DNA of any type were left at the scene, I'm guessing. I was tested for gunpowder residue. I'm assuming if you watched video from any and all resources you could find. I'm wearing the same clothes. The door swung open. In walked Thurston Cooper, his friend and attorney. When he walked in, the air was sucked out. Kenny got quiet, and the two detectives looked defeated. 15 minutes later, the pair walked out into the midday sun. Before Thurston could scold Kenny one more time for talking without waiting, the younger of the two detectives came running up to him. "Mr. Costco, I read everything I could read about the Defender of Children in the Wilmington case. I'm a fan, but more importantly, I believe what you're saying. But you need to give me something, anything that could lead me in the right direction." He then handed his card to Kenny and walked away. The attorney and his client went their separate ways. Kenny was sitting in the parking lot, wondering what Trish was up to, and when he'd be able to fill her in on the most recent events, when his cell phone began to vibrate. It was a Tennessee number, but not Smitty's. He took the call, knowing it wasn't going to be good news. He was, unfortunately, right. Chapter 19. Pure Pride and Confidence. Gray was running on pure adrenaline. She had slept in the car outside Kenny's place, before following him to the airport and finally the condo. Then, gas, snacks, followed by a trip to the mountains of Tennessee. Now she was struggling to keep her eyes open, let alone her focus. When she needed that jolt in the past, all she had to do was take out the photo from the backpack. It was a black and white Polaroid. She handled it as if it was a priceless, fragile piece of art. To her it was. The picture had been taken by a lake. Just her and her dad. She assumed her mom was behind the camera. They both looked so happy. It was her most prized possession by far. So when the crowd began to disperse, she had refocused, regained her passion for her purpose. The photo gently placed back in the tissue, then back inside the book, and finally the book in the larger compartment of the backpack. Her prey was one of the last to exit. He was with a couple of large men. They were having a serious conversation, it seemed. The parking lot cleared, and the three men were the only ones left. Gray was parked in the back, now covered by darkness. No reason to assume anything other than someone had left their car there, for a number of reasons. Still, there was not the opportunity she was looking for. The two bodies left in the condo were for a purpose, a cause. She did not see another reason to ensure Kenny would stay. But these two men with Smitty didn't need to die. So, they wouldn't. She would find an opening. Somewhere, somehow. She'd wait. It was nearly 30 minutes later when the men started to wander towards their vehicles. Gray had not been able to do surveillance on this target as she had the others. He was a recluse. This may be her only opportunity before he crawled back into his den and didn't come out for months. As the other two trucks exited the parking lot, Gray sat in silence. Smitty had started his truck, but he had just sat there. She could see no activity. Then the overhead light flickered on and Smitty exited the truck. Her heart raced. She had been spotted. But when he walked back in the front door, fumbled for his keys, and then disappeared inside, she sat back waiting for her heart rate to fall back to its normal state. This was her opportunity, she quickly decided. Pulling her knife and revolver from the passenger seat, Gray ran, trying to stay in the shadows the whole time, while hoping she could make it to the front door before Smitty came barreling back out. As she stood still and listened for movement, she could feel his breathing on the back of her neck as he spoke the words, "Looking for someone, little lady?" Then, without much effort at all, he had picked her up and tossed her into the hallway that led to the main room of the lodge. He was even bigger in person. Gray felt small looking up at the mountain of a man. The look on his face was one of pure confidence and pride. He placed his large boot on her left arm, and she immediately felt the pain and the pressure of his weight. It was a natural reaction to try to get away from the pain, but it was apparent almost immediately she wasn't going to be able to do that. Smitty felt her give up. She could tell by the smile that crossed his face. That was good. She wanted him to be confident, not seeing her as any kind of a threat. With a little added pressure, he asked, "So, what do we do with you now?" He didn't expect an answer, but what he did next was not good for his health. He released the pressure just enough if he shifted to get a pack of cigarettes out of his front left pant pocket. That was all she needed. The sweeping kick caused him to lose his balance for the briefest of seconds. Enough for Gray. When he regained his composure, she was behind him. As he went to turn, he felt the first cut, which hit its mark. The Achilles tendon. It's the largest and strongest tendon in the body, and when cut, it will cause extreme pain, as well as balance issues. Before Smitty knew it, he was on the ground with Gray on his back, with a knife to his neck. Move a muscle, and you're dead. I'm dead anyways. Good point. Wait. Why? Why kill the people that saved your life? Really? Moments away from what you believe awaits you in the afterlife, and you're still willing to lie. Unbelievable. The second cut was to a throat, and it was deep. He knew he was dead anyway. There was no stopping the inevitable. With a whisper, he said, "We were only trying to help." Chapter 20. Comforting. Sean was not used to spending so much time at home. He had taken care of the little chores around the house, a few projects that had been lingering, had even tackled a couple things that weren't on the list. For the first time in months, he and Joe were going to dinner, just the two of them. Reservations had been made at the flower shop. His wife liked to sit at the counter and watch the process in the open kitchen. The funeral had been the day before. Sean thought it was important for the two of them to reconnect, and he didn't want to wait. His mother-in-law had been with them for a while, and she needed and demanded, in some ways, constant care. There were times he felt Jill barely had time to use the bathroom. The kids had been great through the whole thing. That's why they were going to go to Dollywood the following day as a family. Sean knew Kenny was going through some stuff, and he wanted to be there for him. But Kenny had been the one to tell him, family first. The only problem with that was that Kenny and Leonard had become family to him, Jill, and the kids. He decided he'd trust his friend and colleague, at least until he got back in town. Then he would dig into what was going on and how he could help. Jill came down the stairs. She was lovely. The smile was a little forced, but he understood. Her harm had just passed. While it was expected, it was never easy. He would take it slow, let her lead. She took his hand, and when she reached the bottom of the stairs, Sean felt a comforting warmth in the gesture. Main Street was within walking distance. Gray had traveled up one side and was making her way down the other. Boone was a bustling college town, with all that came along with that, the bars, the quaint coffee shops, retail, and of course the many windows decorating the school's colors and mascot. If a window did not have a capital A with the word Mountaineers in it, then there was a picture of the actual Mountaineer. She found it fun, to the point she bought a hat and a t-shirt so she could join in. The mountains, trees, and the fresh air, they were good for her soul. Gray was not taking as much pleasure in her purpose, her why, as she had hoped. It was now more of a job that she needed to complete before she could be whole. Sitting at a small metal table, people watching, she could see why folks liked the mountain town. She felt at home. It was busy, but comforting at the same time. Kenny had listened to Trish for the last 25 minutes, every detail about giving her notice, cocktails with her friends, and how much trouble it was deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. He had gone first, telling her everything, right up to the phone call letting him know about the murder of Smitty. She had taken it all in, asked him one simple question, and then assumed it was her turn. When done, she surprised Kenny by saying she'd be back in a few days. She promised to send him flight details as soon as they were off the phone. Then she was about to end the conversation and said, "I love you." It was the first time those words were spoken in their relationship. There was a pause, but not because Kenny had to think of a quick way to get off the phone. No, he was in love with her too. He was just taken back for a moment. "I love you too. I can't wait until you're back and we can plan the next steps in our journey." She laughed and said, "That's easy. We're going to visit the rescues and find the perfect dog." He didn't move right away after they disconnected. He thought about her question. "Will you keep us safe?" When he answered yes, she had trusted his answer and moved on. There was a comfort in that, but also a great responsibility. Raleigh is the capital of North Carolina and the second most populous city in the state, behind Charlotte. Gray was ready to leave as soon as she hit the traffic. She had liked what she had read and seen online, The reviews of the area were positive, well, except for traffic. She had gone through what she felt must have been the main hub to get where she needed to get for her next target. The home sat on a country road between Raleigh and Wendell. There was little to no social media activity, so Gray had been lucky that there was public record of the transfer of the ownership of the home. Dusk was fastly approaching. Gray still decided to make a pass by the place anyways, just because. Her reservation for the evening was at the Country Hearth Inn, Nightdale, Raleigh. To this point, she had heard nothing about a serial killer running around seeking revenge on those that had saved her life and killed her father. Had Kenny kept this information to himself? Was fate giving her a free pass to why? It didn't matter. Only a few more boxes to check, and she'd be heading west. As she slowly passed David's place on the left, she saw him sitting on the front porch, dog lying next to his chair. It appeared from the distance she was at, he was either passed out or sleeping. The timing would have been perfect. Well, perfect if there hadn't been a neighbor out on the right-hand side, just up a ways, out in his field, plowing or planting something. All she knew was even with the dust he was creating, he'd have a clear view of anything she tried. So she passed, knowing her prey was not worried about her in the least. He was comfortable. Perfect. Chapter 21. The Trees. It had been 2 days. Gray was more than ready to get this done. David, however, was not cooperating. He had been nowhere, other than his front and back porch. Hadn't even been as far as the mailbox. And while he was off the beaten path, some may say it was surprisingly an active area. Someone was always out watering, mowing, planting, pulling something, walking down the country road at all hours. She'd even seen someone on a bike with a flashlight bungee corded to the handlebars cruising the street in the middle of the night. She did not feel comfortable trying to break into the house. 1, it wasn't her specialty, and 2, he could be sleeping in a chair with a gun on his lap, and there was certainly a dog that would be involved. That left his front and back porch. Gray was not one to steer away from a challenge, so she had gone shopping at Walmart. There was a helpful young man, more than eager to assist her with her purchase, answering all her questions and making sure she was comfortable with the weapon before she left. He never once asked why she would be needing a crossbow with the name Killer Instinct Lethal 405. He was too concerned on how to get her phone number. She had done her research. The average arrow will travel around 50 yards or 150 feet. The front porch was out. It was too far and open. But the backyard had a deck that David liked to sit and smoke on, and the tree line was only about 50 feet from his sitting spot. She had already been there a couple times, picked her spot. 3 a.m. She had parked a mile away in a little gravel area alongside the road. Then she had crossed the road and entered the wooded area and traveled towards David's place. The trees were old and had been there a long time. They were perfect for what she needed. Now, she sat behind the same tree. This time, she'd walked further, leaving her car at an old gas station that may or may not still be serving the community. She was prepared to sit in the dark and wait until her prey decided to wander out. She had even decided to let him enjoy his last cigarette. Maybe. It was a couple hours later that the first light came on. If she was guessing, bathroom, then kitchen, followed by the back door, letting its owner know it still needed WD-40. Then David in his boxers and t-shirt, coffee in hand, and his cigarettes and lighter in the other. Gray had him in her sight. The idea of watching him another minute turned her stomach. Her legs and back were telling her to get this over with and move on. She listened, and with one shot, she hit her target. It wasn't perfect. She had aimed high and struck him in the neck. It could have been a fatal shot, but she wasn't sure and did not want to take chances. David dropped what he had been holding in each hand. The arrow had gone in the front and out the back. It had hit an artery on its way through. David was in shock and losing blood. He fell to his knees, where his dog met him. He did not have the strength or the time to say goodbye to his best friend. The next arrow went straight through his left lung. David toppled over and died quickly. Gray was almost back to the car when she thought about the note. Not going to happen, that little voice spoke. Time to get out of town. She agreed, pulled out, and never looked back. Charlotte, then a road trip out west. Chapter 22. You don't deserve to be happy. Trish had been true to her word She had been in town only a couple days when she informed him they'd be visiting 3 of the half-dozen animal rescues in the area. Currently, they were walking a mixed breed named Duncan. He was a cute, medium-sized dog that was probably part lab with several other parts sprinkled in. He seemed to be so happy outside. He was certainly playing up to the decision-maker. Trish was eating it up. They had been to the first 2 shelters. They were loud. The dogs, for the most part, just barked and seemed a little too aggressive. Duncan was working it. He was happy, tail wagging. He was great on the leash, and when Trish sat down on the grass, he hopped into her lap. At that point, Kenny asked, "So what's the process if we want to adopt Duncan?" Less than 45 minutes later, Trish and Duncan were leading him through the pet store. Bed, doggy bowls, food, treats, color-coordinated leash and collar combo, more treats, stuffed toys. The cart was full and Kenny was carrying a car seat for the little guy. Of course, the same color scheme of blue and black to match the leash and collar. Kenny didn't even know they made such things. Trish was beaming, so Kenny was happy as well. A dog was a fun way to start their new journey together, he thought, as he watched Trish talking to another shopper about their dogs. He had a feeling they'd be back in the near future. As they tossed their goods in the back of the sedan, there was someone watching them. Gray had been with them on their dog tour. She watched as they held hands, laughed, and finally walked out with a cute dog on a leash and her arm wrapped around his. She was madder than she had been in a long time. That should have been her life. She should have found her Prince Charming. Her holding hands, laughing, bringing home a pet. Maybe someday, when she settled in, maybe that would be her next purpose, her next why, to find love. Now, she could only hate. The drive back to the condo only took 7 minutes. Gray decided in those 420 seconds that she would finish this chapter of her life in the parking garage. She was not worried about the control arm at the entrance. Somehow, it had been broken in the last few days, so the gate was up until the park could come in. They parked in their designated spots, climbed out of the vehicle. Still all smiles, the female took the dog to the concrete divider where he would do his due, leaving Kenny leaning in the trunk of the car. She could have shot him in the back, no problem, but she wanted this to be close and personal. David had seemed so distant and unattached. She did not like the feeling after that. So she moved in, kicked him in the lower back, caused him to fall almost into the trunk, hitting his head on something because when he turned around, there was a large cut and blood dripping down his left eye. Before he could gain his composure or his bearings, another kick, this one to the side of his head, followed by another to his midsection. Kenny was on his knees. He could not see Trish, so he tried to call to her, but he couldn't. The kick to the midsection had taken away his breath. He would need a minute, but he guessed he didn't have a minute. Standing over him was Gray, those eyes, the blade in her hand. Words were not exchanged. They both knew why they were in this moment. The knife began its descent with speed and force. Kenny closed his eyes and hoped. And then a second later, he got the answer he was waiting for. The knife hit the bullet and stab-resistant vest. He opened his eyes to see the shock in her eyes. She stood and with grace and skill kicked his leg, instantly breaking it at one point. Then she moved into position to take another stab, this time at his head. Kenny was not as quick as he once was, and he was fighting the pain of the head and the other injuries. This time he kept his eyes open and prayed. Kenny heard the shot and saw the bright green eyes fade at the same time. She fell on top of him. He didn't have the strength to move her. She had a smaller build, but she had packed a lot into those kicks. With the added weight on his chest, he certainly could not call out to Trish. Please let her be okay. Chapter 23. Old Friends. The woman he had been watching was so focused on her prey that there was no way she even considered she was being watched as well. He was good at surveillance. Just ask him. But she made it darn easy. He could see how it was going to play out as soon as she exited her SUV. They had talked about bringing her in alive, even though that would certainly cause trouble for Kenny and taint those that had died. But they had agreed it was the right thing to do if possible. He could see it wouldn't be possible. She was quick and determined, and a second of hesitation and his friend would have been killed. So, Leonard had pulled the trigger. One shot, and she died instantly, falling on top of Kenny. Walking over to the back of the Audi, he watched as Trish rushed to Kenny. She couldn't wait, however, because Duncan was faster, and he had already started kissing Kenny on the face. The sirens could be heard in the distance. Leonard had called 911. They didn't move Gray from atop Kenny until the police arrived and did their thing. It was several hours of questions, but at the end, when an FBI agent took over the scene, it ended quickly. He was to the point, thorough, no small talk, just the facts. He had started following the happenings and the events surrounding Gray, and the parking garage completed his file. He asked Kenny, Leonard, and Trish if they knew why she would have gone on such a killing spree. None could say for sure, but Kenny did comment. She'd lost a lot with the accident. Maybe she'd lost more than doctors or medical staff realized. With that, they were free to go. Kenny hugged his old friend and thanked him. Then he hugged Trish and said, "Would it be okay with you both if we just ordered in and tried to watch a funny movie?" 3 weeks later, Gwen sat in her cell. 23 hours in, 1 out each day. She had read the article twice. She would read it 100 more times. Her friend, her pupil, had been shot dead when all she was trying to do was make things right. An eye for an eye. Gwen did not have TV privileges, and the newspaper she received was usually old, and the news that came, even older. Her heart was broken as she thought about her last conversation with her friend. A guard tossed her an envelope through the slot in the door. She didn't immediately go retrieve it, but when she did, what she read surprised her almost as much as the news about Gray. The envelope contained a letter from Gray's attorney regarding her trust. Gray, before she had been murdered, had left her attorney special instructions in the case of her demise. The amount of $127,000 was in her trust after the selling of the house and paying off of a few obligations, a trust she had left to Gwen to help with her appeal. Gwen sat with the note in the article. She would spend every waking hour trying to figure out how to get revenge for Gray. Every waking hour. At the same time, Trish and Kenny were attending an open house, a beautiful home on a lake. 3 stories, 2 decks, and plenty of room for Duncan to run. Kenny and Trish held hands as they explored the home in silence. Walking back from the dock, Kenny stopped and said, "I think we should make an offer." Trish could not hold back her excitement. "I mean, it is perfect, but you know I'm unemployed right now. Let's make an offer and worry about the rest later." The couple could not get to the realtor fast enough. Gwen reread her letter. She had changed the words multiple times. Now she felt it was as perfect as it was going to be. It was from the heart and as accurate as she could remember. Now it would be up to the reader or the readers to decide. The letter was addressed to the Innocence Project, and it may be the most important thing she had ever written in her life. The end. I hope you've enjoyed listening to My Words, Our Journey, Season 8, When Karma Kills. I'm Monty, your host and author. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.